All of our desires stem from one desire. It's to come home, to be at peace. We lost the art of intimacy, and intimacy in a spiritual sense. Zen Master Dogen said, enlightenment is just intimacy with all things. It's a very nearness, at oneness with whatever you're experiencing, with the outside world. But Alex, if you find this peace, then what? You're gonna sit in a monastery for the rest of your life? As if it's some end stage, some final goal that you achieve. But to me, it's the starting point. Because from that peace, from that place, all beauty, all truth, all love is born. To dwell in the now, in this nothingness, in this presence, and to find that that is all you've been looking for your entire life. It's quite the revelation. So peace is not the absence of negative emotions, it is the acceptance of what is. The first thing we always notice is when we sit still is we notice an absence of sound, an absence of distractions. But when you sit still for longer, you start noticing a presence. And that presence is the presence of God. Give it a name, whatever. That's the presence of being itself. So if you want a spiritual practice, this is a fantastic spiritual practice. Lock yourself in a room with nothing there to distract yourself, except
Welcome back to Spirit Unfolding. And before we begin, I want to invite you to stop for a second, to just come to the now, to drop your shoulders, to feel your breath, to feel into where you are residing right now. And on this podcast, we dive into so many different things. We speak about so many different things. But today we're going to explore something that is almost nothing, that is hard to name, that is everything and nothing at the same time. And together with Alexander and Heijer, I invite you to listen from a different place, to sit more with the question than seek to find directly an answer. That's the intention we have for today, and I'm so excited to sit down with Alexander. He's been an inspiration for a long time, sharing ancient wisdom, making the bridge from ancient and Eastern wisdom and texts and quotes to our modern world and the struggles that many of us face. And he is a speaker, a writer, guiding and helping thousands of people around the world. I think there's about 180,000 people that are tuning into his contemplations on the nature of reality. And Alexander, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for the invite. Great to be here with you.
Yeah. We chatted about it before a little bit. You just came back from 10 days sitting in Vipassana.
Exactly.
What is for you the thing that you keep going, why you keep going back?
Well, my teacher would say, once you've tasted the Dhamma, you don't want anything else. And I think I agree with that. But it is, many people go into Vipassana meditations as an experience. Like, I want to experience this. I want to have this experience. But for me, it's really about learning to meditate. It's a school in that sense. And every year I go back, I learn to deepen the technique, to become better at it. And I learn new things all the time. And because I'm obsessed with learning, I think that's why I keep getting back. Yeah. That's one answer. The other one is also that I feel that I am at my most creative when I'm still, when my mind is still. So whenever I write my books, especially my last one, I think 80% of it I wrote in my mind during sitting meditation. So the mind is just very creative, or at least it's not even the mind, it's beyond that, it's a stillness. Out of that comes a lot of creativity. And that's another reason why I keep coming back, because I like to be silent. Sometimes I feel like words are just distracting.
Yeah. Is that place where you're present, but at the same time, you're almost starting to lose the grasp of self, and you're more sort of a channel of something in a sense, maybe.
I never use the word channel. I think it's just there's just immense clarity, especially long periods of silence. Everything becomes more clear, and I just speak right from that clarity. I think that's how I see it.
Yeah.
And that clarity is ever in expanding. My teacher used to say that over the course of his 40 years of the spiritual path, he just said, I just started seeing everything I already saw just clearer and clearer. It's an ever increasing process.
I haven't personally done a Vipassana yet. And part of me feels a lot of resistance, because I can feel that I'm gonna experience resistance in those moments. Can you take us through, well, let's say in the course of 10 days, what kind of journey you're going through? What are you experiencing?
Well, I've done about 7 or 8 now every year, and they're all very different. In one sense, the content of the experiences is different. Different life themes that I'm struggling with, or different things that come up. But there is also almost like a universal, at least for me, and that's I also see with a lot of other students. Because the first 3 days, you're only asked to pay attention to your breathing, to the nostrils. And for 3 days, all you have to do is just pay attention to where your breath goes in and out. And that's super hard. I mean, I can only do that for about 10 seconds, and then my mind is wandering away. But the job is to constantly, when you're aware that you're gone, you come back. And after about 3 days, your mind becomes razor sharp. So what happens is that you can really feel the touch of your breath. And not even to the nostrils, but even a lower part, you can just feel really subtle sensations. So the mind becomes so subtle that you can also observe very subtle sensations. And after 3 days, they start with Vipassana, which means observing things as they are. So what you're doing then is you observe reality as it is, within the framework of the body. So you start on the top of the head and just see if you can experience any sensations going on there. And then you go scan the whole body. And in this process, your mind becomes subtler and subtler and subtler. And what people often forget about what meditation is about, often people, you see a lot of modern practices of mindfulness where it's about getting calm, or it's very instrumental use. You do this to get something. But Vipassana meditation is actually just, the whole teaching can be summarized in 2 things. It's awareness of sensations and equanimity. What that means is that you become aware of the sensations in your body, and you learn to remain equanimous, which means to have a balanced mind, whether you have negative sensations, or at least gross or painful sensations, let's call it that, or very pleasant sensations. So what happens with the painful sensations, we often develop aversion or resistance. We don't want to feel them. And when we develop resistance, the mind becomes very gross. And you're not subtle enough to observe. So all you do is that you remain equanimous, which means you don't react with craving to pleasant sensations or clinging, and you don't react with aversion to painful sensations. You just stay with the reality as it is. And that's liberating, eventually. And that's what you're training. So the whole process, I mean, there's often a psychological process going on, because when you're silent for 10 days, especially when people do that for the first time, all the things you thought you've dealt with already, they come up to the surface, like unresolved trauma, fights with friends that still bother you. There's so much coming to the surface, and all you have to do is just take your mind back to the sensations and don't bother about them. And that's how you're actually training your mind to be in a state of equanimity or acceptance of what is. And that's how you eventually become more and more peaceful with whatever is happening. So peace is not the absence of negative emotions. It is the acceptance of what is. So the letting go of the resistance, or letting go of the craving, or the constant grasping and seeking. And that's what you're actually training in these 10 days.
Yeah. Seems very useful in this time and age.
Absolutely, absolutely. And very difficult.
Mm.
I often wonder what would happen if the Buddha lived in our time. Would he also become the Buddha?
Yeah.
We don't know. Yeah.
Coming back from being in that place for 10 days, what's it like to come back to, let's say, the chaos of this world?
Actually, it's very tough. Every year it seems to become tougher and tougher. We just spoke before that, especially yesterday and this morning, I had tremendous struggle, because when I get used to silence, what happens to me is I come back to my natural rhythm. And my natural rhythm is way slower than modern society. So it's always painful to realize that that my natural rhythm is completely different from the rhythm of everything going on. So, and I live in Amsterdam, and that's not a good thing. I mean, I feel like I should get out of here, because, and it's getting stronger every year. So for me, it's very tough. And even to the point that sometimes I feel a bit alienated from modernity. That I feel like I would do better in a more contemplative life. Because especially if I want to write books, I need a lot of silence. So that's one thing. So I remember yesterday I went into town on my bicycle, and I was on the Kinkerstraat in Amsterdam. I got overwhelmed, like completely. I was like, this is so busy, so loud, so crowded, and people are shouting on the streets. And that's also part of the practice. It's part of the practice to just stay with the breath, allow reality to be as it is. But for me, that's quite difficult, because I get overwhelmed quite easily. I have a bit of a neurodivergent brain, which is a tough thing I have to deal with my entire life already. So I think I'm a bit more sensitive than general people, which is my strength, my quality, but also makes it hard to survive sometimes in a modern, very rushed society. So that's the tough part. On the other hand, I also noticed that every year I'm better at staying true to myself. So I learn to not just adapt constantly to the pace of society, but also to find my own pace within this society. And that's something I'm learning. But that's an ongoing process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like everything in life, right? There's not really a necessarily a goal that we will ever achieve and then be happy, in a sense.
It would be wonderful if there's this goal and then you're like finished. And then from then on, all your troubles are gone.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. And that's also not what we train in meditation. It's training to be equanimous and not to have some end goal to be finished.
Yeah, I love that. Like what you just described, like I share that of like, as I'm slowing down more in life, I feel like I become more and more sensitive, which asks of me to slow down even more. And the gap with the speed of society becomes even bigger. Yeah. And I'm really curious, like how that's going to evolve for us as a society. Is it going to go more into directions where more and more people are going to, like, appreciate more stillness and create more stillness for themselves? And at some point, it won't just be, let's say, people that are a little bit more, I wouldn't say in a cave, but like a little bit more away from the busyness of society. But that's going to be a let's say a community with a slower pace at some point, perhaps. It's interesting. Like I guess they already have with monks and those kind of things. Yeah. It
used to be quite normal in ancient societies that you either chose to be a householder or a monk. You had these two options. Either you're doing the slow path of liberation, where you become a householder and you just have the earthly life, the societal life, or you focus full-time on the liberation process, you become a monk. And it's still there. it does resonate with me what you said about the pace of society. What you do see, and I think Hartmut Rosa, a German sociologist and philosopher, he speaks about this a lot in his work called Resonance. And one of his concepts is called the acceleration society. What he notices is that the pace of society is ever increasing. And it's because we've built a system that only works if it grows continuously. Which means, if you break it down simply, that we need to run faster and faster every year to remain in the same place. Which eventually results into isolation, alienation, and the extreme example of that is burnout. So despite all the effort and awareness we have on mental health, you see it's only increasing and increasing. So I think we have to get to a point where people are so fed up with it that they demand something different.
Yeah, it seems to me, you talked a little bit about being witness to a sort of a coaching situation at some point where people were really trying really hard to sort of, in a sense, get more peace within themselves. And I feel like maybe we're, as a society, largely still looking at this from the wrong point of view. Whereas like we're trying really hard, why actually what we should do is stop trying at all. To be more instead of keep doing. And we're just like let's say our monkey mind, or maybe even reptilian brain constantly gives us new ideas of what we can do, but maybe it's about doing less.
I definitely agree. But that's also the perhaps one of the deepest problems. It is really difficult. It's almost unbearable to just be. Most people cannot bear just being. And that's why the mind, as soon as you're in silence, in stillness, there's nothing to do. And this is what people who meditate immediately recognize. Within 10 seconds, the mind is going somewhere. Because it's almost unbearable to just be. So what happens is, when you start meditating, let's say you're going to sit for 1 hour. I remember when I did this for the first time. Within 3 minutes, my mind was like, what am I doing here? I should do something. I'm wasting my time. And then when I got adjusted a little bit to sitting, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit here for an hour. Then my mind was still not just being here; it was constantly making up stories. Like it's a seductive force of Maya in some sense that constantly gets you lured into stories, because stories are way more fascinating than just be here with nothing. So at first, it's almost impossible to not do anything. I see this around with colleagues, with my clients. Everyone is so busy that they're so used to it. When they sit still, they can't bear it, and they just go back to work. I think, if I remember correctly, I read in one of the works of Jung that he visited a tribe. I don't remember where, but the head of the tribe talked about Western people as having this kind of hard face that is always looking for something. And he was wondering, what are people looking for? It's like we're always searching for the next thing, the new thing. So to just sit, doing nothing, that's almost unbearable. Until you reach the point where you just surrender to it and allow it to be here. And then at some point when you're adjusted to it, the first thing we always notice is when we sit still is we notice an absence of sound, an absence of distractions. But when you sit still for longer, you start noticing a presence. And that presence is the presence of God. Give it a name, whatever. For people who are not religious, that's the presence of being itself. And that presence is, I think that's liberation in some sense. But that's also very difficult, because if you realize that you don't need anything, then one thing people mostly fear, and I've seen this with friends, who like they're terribly afraid to meditate, because they're afraid that if they sit still, they enjoy it, and then they don't have the ambition anymore to maintain their lifestyle, and then what's going to happen?
But that's still something, looking at it from the perspective of someone that enjoys that lifestyle at the moment.
Yes.
So it's like they're also afraid of change, really.
Yeah, and it's a bit more nuanced, because if you're very ambitious and you have a strong drive, it doesn't mean that you lose that. What does happen often is what I see, especially when I look at my own life, is that the drive is dedicated to something that's not just for yourself. it becomes less egocentric. So it's not about you and your life, but you still have drive, but you want to use it for something that feels meaningful. So it might shift your perspective and your change. But to dwell in the now, in this nothingness, in this presence, and to find that that is all you've been looking for your entire life. It's quite the revelation. And it's quite terrifying sometimes, because it's like, I don't need much. I just need to be present. And that doesn't mean, and that's the mistake people often make, is that they think, okay, I wrote about it in my book. Someone once told me, like, but Alex, if you find this peace, then what? You're going to sit in a monastery for the rest of your life? As if it's some end stage, some final goal that you achieve. But to me, it's the starting point. Because from that peace, from that place, all beauty, all truth, all love is born. So it's more of a starting point. You become more compassionate, and you feel like sharing this peace with people. You feel like doing things that enhance the quality of being. So it's not you're going to sit there for the rest of your life. Maybe for some. I mean, I've been in a place where I was like in a meditation retreat, long retreat. I was like, I could stay here for 2 years, just sit here and be happy. But of course, there's more to life. And,
You mentioned just quickly a tribe, and just before we started recording, you mentioned another tribe. I'd love for you to share that story, because it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting. I watched a documentary, but I forgot the name of the tribe. It was something like Piranha or Parinya, something like that, in the Amazon. And it was about a documentary I saw about a guy who was a Christian missionary who thought, I'm going to go there and I'm going to convert them to Christianity. But eventually it didn't happen, because they ended up converting him. Because everything that his belief, his faith promised, they already had. And what I found so interesting about that tribe is that in their language, they didn't have numbers yet. So if you asked one of the women how many children you have, and they look at you like, what do you mean? They could point at them. But the implications of not having numbers was very profound, because they didn't have a concept of time, not of the future. Like, they didn't add up days like we do. So they continuously dwelled in the present moment. In other words, they haven't gone to the fall yet. And this interesting, if you look at the word religion, from the root word religare, which means to rebind or reconnect. There's a confession in there that we are disconnected. Right. So we need a religion to reconnect. But if you're not disconnected, you don't need the bridge. You know what I mean? And this is what is the sense that I got from watching this documentary. These people were there living like hunter-gatherers. When some of the women experienced hunger, she like pushed the men, and then the man was very proud, picked up like a spear, and he went fishing, and he came back with food, and they were all happy again. And then that was out of the way, and they were just being there again. And of course, this is a romantic look. I mean, their life is also tough. But then again, they started researching them because they looked so happy. And then we're like, how are we going to study happiness? Well, maybe just by looking at people's faces, how much they smile, because they tend to smile a lot. They didn't have all the stress that comes with the Western world. And I think what many people long for today, I mean, that's why people like Eckhart Tolle and all these spiritual traditions are so popular, is people long just to experience a little bit of that peace that comes from being in the present moment. And that's also what I think my work, what I hope to point at with my work.
Yeah. It's like you rightly said, it's not an end stage, but it's a place that you can become familiar with, so you can return to it whenever you need it, in a sense. I've really enjoyed like your last book that I read over the last while, like Finding What Was Never Lost, and I love like the title. It points to something that, in a sense, we all know it, we all have it, yet we're not aware of it, in a sense. And you talk about like the 7 stages, and I have to look it up because I don't know about, so the 7 stages of the spiritual path: suffering, sincerity, stillness, surrender, shift, simplicity, and serenity. How for you has like that thing that was never lost. How would you describe that? And how do these 7 stages attribute to finding it?
Well, let me be clear about the stages. It's the chapters of the book. I wouldn't say there are definitely, there's like a progression of stages in that, in my personal journey, but I wouldn't call them stages, because that which is never lost is ever present. Yeah. So there's no path. It's more of a direct realization, because as soon as I think I need to get there, get where, then that seeking, that's what a lot of people, they come in the spiritual path because they're seeking something. But the seeking itself is already a dismissal of the present moment. And once you become aware of the present moment, then the seeking dissolves. You're here.
You start to
see. So that's why you rightly say it's a return. It's a return. And the best way I could describe it is I use a metaphor. I borrow it from Rupert Spira, a famous non-dual teacher. He talks about the screen and the movie. Because we constantly get lost in the movie, in the stories. And the story has an identity, that I am, and I get lost in these stories. But from the perspective of the screen is ever present. So in other words, another way of thinking about this is when we meditate. When I'm in meditation, I practice awareness. I become aware of the sensations in my body. I could say that the sensations in the body, they're ever changing. Everything is impermanent. That's like the movie. The movie is constantly changing. Then I feel a sensation in my knee, then I feel some pain in my back, then that's dissolved, then I feel something else. It's ongoing, it's ever changing. But the awareness, that which witnesses is like the screen of awareness, which is ever present, which is untouched by the sensations. It is only within this awareness, these sensations come and go. And if you recognize at some point that you are this awareness, then, and this is what takes often a lot of practice, because, for example, if you practice meditation, I can give a personal example. I do have a knee injury. So when I sit in meditation for 10 hours a day, I get quite a severe pain in my knee. And in the beginning, I'm like very annoyed by that usually, because I want to sit still, and then I run into all these accumulated reactionary patterns, which come with a whole story, like I'm not good enough, I can't do it, I'm a loser, blah, 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 blah. That's the story. But if I drop the story and just be present, I experience a strong sensation in my knee. And that's actually like a very tingling, very, very sharp, tingling sensation. It's nothing else. And when I become aware of that and allow that to be, because the suffering is different from pain. Pain is a reality. Nobody can escape pain. But suffering is added to it by trying to resist the pain, by not allowing it. The resisting, that causes the suffering. We can suffer from the pain, or we can just allow the pain to be. And that's what I find very interesting. There's this teacher called Nisargadatta Maharaj. One person once said to him, like, "But sir, I'm experiencing suffering." And he said, "No, you're not experiencing suffering. You're suffering, you're experiencing." In other words,
wow,
the pain in the knee, the sensation, is just a sensation. But because I develop hatred towards it, or I find it very inconvenient, or I don't want to be with it, I suffer from it. So what happens if I'm just aware of it? What starts happening slowly but surely is there's a spaciousness coming around this sensation, a spaciousness of awareness. And at some point, it is no longer my pain, it's just pain. There's pain somewhere down there in the knee, but it's not me experiencing pain. And that's why they say in a lot of these traditions, it's not that the pain goes away, but the one who is experiencing the pain, that one dissolves. So then there's just a sensation. Now, that's not an end goal, to come back to your question, that you achieve, but it is ever-present reality that we have to become aware of. But what we do is we create an identity out of this. Like, oh, I'm suffering this pain. Why do I have this stupid injury? Why should this always overcome me? And I'm so silly and blah, blah, blah. And then you start believing the story and then you become depressed.
Yeah, and then
what was going on?
And maybe you identify yourself as depressed at some point.
Yeah,
so
and then that becomes an
further.
identity.
Yeah.
I remember very vividly that a few years ago I was playing padel. And I was very enthusiastic. So I played like 3 times a week. And then all of a sudden, I got the very sore pain in my arm. And then I was on my bicycle going home from padel. And I had such a pain in my arm. And immediately there was a story going on. Oh, Alex, you're so stupid. Why you play too much? Now you might have a tennis arm and you can never play padel again. And for a second, I started believing the story. I became very sad. And then I caught myself doing that, and then I realized what's going on. Oh, there's a sensation in my arm.
Yeah.
And I was quiet again. And the next day, the sensation was gone. But it's the mind is so quick to catch us, to make a story out of it. And this is what all these great traditions, whether it's Advaita or whether it's Buddhist or Zen, they speak of this identity, this kind of egoic self, that's just a thinking activity. It's the thinker in some sense. It's a bundle of thoughts, habits, beliefs, opinions about myself. Mm-hmm. And eventually it's kind of a figure that we think that we are. A figure that you can judge, that's either better or worse than other people. And we think we are this figure. But we are just the awareness in which that figure arises. And that's the return. The return is to come back and to realize that, and there's always the kind of a relaxation there. That doesn't mean your challenges in life are over. They're still there. Yeah. But you don't get caught up in the story. You just deal with it immediately as it should be dealt with. And then you become responsive rather than reactive. And I think that's the win.
Yeah, you're like, your perception changes by simply witnessing something.
Yeah.
Like I believe that our reality is dictated by our perception of things around us, in a sense. I love that we will never know in a sense maybe, but like you explained, like, or you told like, okay, the moment you just let it be, this pain in your arm, and the next day it's gone. Whereas if you're resisting it, you start to put more energy into the story of it being painful and a problem. And as you put more energy into it, you give it, in a sense, perhaps energy to continue existing.
That could be, I don't know. That could be, I'll never know. The only thing I know, and that's what the practice is, be with what is. And because we're not in control of the sensations that we get. We are only in control in whether or not we can just be with them. And that's the practice. So it could be that I would have a more severe pain if I kept resisting and rejecting it. I don't know. But there's even a point where that doesn't matter. You're free anyway. You're free in the sense, not free from pain. And this is something we could go into. What does freedom mean? But freedom, a lot of times in modern world, people think of freedom as freedom for themselves, like freedom to do whatever they want to do or to be whoever they want to be. But there's a other kind of freedom. That's freedom not for oneself, but from oneself, from this egoic self that wants things to go their own way. And freedom from that is not a freedom, it's not where you kind of escape reality, but where you let go of the desire to escape reality. You're fully free, not from reality, but in reality, just as it is. And I think that's a deeper freedom. It's more referred often to inner freedom.
I love that. Yeah, I think when you have that, then you don't need the other one anymore, in a sense.
Right? I mean, of course, if you are in a very unhealthy situation, I mean, of course, you have to take action, conscious action, to get in a better state. There's always the practical element to life as well. I'm not going to ignore that. I tried that once, and it keeps challenging you anyway. So I'm also practical in the sense that, I'm not the most practical person actually. That's what people keep telling me. But practical in the sense that if you're in a situation that's not helpful, then you have to do everything you can to get out of the situation. But what I'm trying to do is do that from a place of inner freedom. So you can choose, so you can take conscious action instead of blindly reacting to the situation. I think that's more helpful.
Yeah. And in that sense, having more control from a more balanced place, from a more peaceful place.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. How would you say that in those moments, how do we then actually come to that awareness when we, for example, don't have the space to sit down for 10 days in silence?
Well, that's why, at least for me and for many people I speak to, a constant practice is necessary. Because sometimes in the moment, it's really hard to catch yourself. So that's why practice is so important. Because when I practice every day, then, someone says something mean to me or whatever. Maybe in the past I was in a reactive state for 5 minutes. Now it might be 3 minutes. That's a win. But it's really hard in the moment to catch yourself. It's often like afterwards you're like, what did I do? Why did I act so mean, or why was I so reactive? And then you catch yourself later on, which is also fine. You can learn from that. But especially with difficult emotions, especially anger is very seductive. Why I say seductive? Because anger always creates self-righteous thoughts. You see, with angry people, they're always right, the other one is wrong. That's what anger does. It creates a self-righteousness. And that's also why they say anger makes blind. So, and this is what we learn in meditation, is that to observe reality as it is, you can't say to people, observe your anger, because it's too abstract. What are you going to observe? Where do you see the anger? What you can do, however, there are two things happening when you're angry that you can observe. One is the breath goes faster. So you can notice your breathing going faster. And there are sensations somewhere in the body. I feel my heart is beating faster, for example. So what you can do, if you catch yourself when you're angry, is to go back to the breath and just be aware of the breathing or the sensations in your body. And instead of trying to react to the sensations and get away from it, just observe it. Because that's meditation practices. These ancient masters were very nuanced. They didn't say express your anger. They also didn't say to suppress your anger. There's a middle way, which is just observe it. When you observe it, you allow it to be, which doesn't mean you give it free rein and you start shouting. It also doesn't mean that you say, I'm not angry, and you suppress it, because that what only happens is whatever you suppress and keep suppressing, then you explode a moment later, or you get a hernia or something else.
Yeah, it will come.
It will come,
and it will come up. Yeah.
Whatever you push away, read Freud, whatever you push away comes out in nasty ways. So the middle way is to just observe it, to allow it fully, but not react to it, just be with it. And then you see that it doesn't stay for very long. And that's how you can catch yourself to a certain extent. Either via the breath or the sensations in your body, and just be with them. And it often helps not to express the anger, but if it's in a relationship, just to say like, hey, I'm a bit triggered now, or this is what's happening. And often, this is interesting, I learned this from a friend, Olivier Wienans. He said to me that suffering or pain that's not brought into connection turns into suffering. So when you can be with the pain, whether it's anger or something else, and you can just express it, hey, I feel anger, or I feel I'm suffering, that also helps already. Because you bring it into connection. You don't start shouting, but you just allow it to be there. And that's how we can catch yourself in the moment, I guess.
One of the early episodes I did was with Arun Thompson, and he talked about this concept of speaking from the feeling. Speaking of the feeling, not from the feeling. So that's kind of the same. Like because you can be with it in yourself. You can also like express, hey, I'm experiencing anger right now. I might need some space. Or like if you're in a situation where you can't just be by yourself with that experience without, people might expect something of you in that moment, but it's a very different thing than like expressing it coming from that place. Yeah.
And especially with anger, it's very difficult because what I found difficult is the other side of it is that when you get overpowered by anger, what I noticed in myself when I started meditating around 2016, 17, I felt like, oh, I'm a meditator now, I'm very spiritual, so I shouldn't get too angry. And then I got completely overpowered by anger, and afterwards I was like, oh my God. And this is also what's often called spiritual bypassing, or when you create a spiritual ego. You come out of a retreat and you're like, I'm very spiritual now, and I'm not angry. Everything that's ego, I'm gonna reject. But then it only creates more of a tension, because then it's really hard to be with these emotions. And when they overpower you, you often feel very bad about yourself, and then you're full of guilt and all these negative emotions. So I think the key also here is to practice some mildness towards yourself, even when you get overpowered. We're human. We get overpowered by emotions. These emotions are older than us. They're very strong. They can take us over. And I think in a healthy relationships or in the community, it's also helpful to repair once you get overpowered, and to acknowledge that you're also human. Otherwise, people get very... there's always a middle way to be found. That's, I think, what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. I've been contemplating recently a lot on, I wouldn't say necessarily enlightenment, but like the seemingly fundamental paradoxes of deep truths. That was one of the things that you had in your book, and I have to look it up quickly. A quote from H.W. Punya: "If you see through the illusion, you are enlightened. If you think you are enlightened, you are in the illusion."
Yeah.
I think that's such
a fundamental insight.
Yeah. Yeah. Yet there seems like there's another layer in there where it's like, oh, I see through the illusion, and then there comes like this, in a sense, spiritual ego comes knocking on the door of like, oh, so now I'm enlightened, but then you're not. It's like it's such an interesting space and energy to sort of contemplate. And
what helped me a lot is I went through a Jungian psychoanalyst once, and Jung was very keen on this. He realized that whenever you get a very fundamental insight, the ego quickly catches it and gets inflated and thinks, look at how special I am. I got this super secret knowledge. You see that also in the conspiracy types. Don't say all of them, of course, but and I got into that as well, that you start reading all this knowledge that other people don't have, and before you know, the ego starts feeling like, I'm special. Yeah, I know all this special stuff. And the desire to be special is perhaps one of the biggest obstacles on the spiritual path. No one is special. We're all unique, but not special. We're all unique. And I like what the Zen Buddhists say. That's why I like Zen. It's so down to earth. The Zen Buddhists would say, no matter how long you sit in meditation, you will never become anything special. And it's because it's not about you becoming something. That's what the ego does. It gets inflated. And it's perhaps important to distinguish between the egoic tendencies and present awareness. The ego has, I would say, almost like two polarities. It's either grandiosity or depression. Why is when we are young, we all start crafting this beautiful image of ourselves, like this identity, like this is who I am. I'm so fantastic. My teacher Gwenka would say, I'm so wonderful. You have this beautiful crafted image, and you not only craft it in your own mind, but also in other people's minds. And then we get very attached to that image. And there's actually two things that can happen. Either we live up to that image and we feel a sense of grandiosity. Look at how fantastically special I am. Or we're not able to live up to that image, and then we become very depressed. And you see this also in both covert and overt narcissism. The overt one is very grandiose, feels superior to others. But the other one is sometimes also called fragile narcissism. It's the very depressed type that also has a very big ego, but is not able to live up to it and feels very depressed. And sometimes this depression is the biggest catalyst for awakening. See what happened to Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle. They were very depressed. Even Eckhart Tolle said at some point, I cannot live with myself any longer. And then it clicked. Who is this me and this myself that I cannot live with any longer? Are there two? And then it clicks. One is this image, who I think I should be. And that, if you can't live up to that, can start to become it presses you down. The weight becomes so heavy that you can't bear that pain anymore of not being able to live up to that until you wake up like, poof, that was the illusion. What is the problem right now? I'm here, I'm breathing. I am. And that I amness is the way out of that. So this egoic path is either inflation, I feel very special and fantastic, wonderful, look at how much spiritual knowledge I have, or there's deflation. I feel very depressed. But both of them are tied to me, my identity. I am depressed. I feel I live up to this image or I don't. Whereas the third way, the way of liberation, where all the spiritual teachers talk about, is not about either living up to the image or not living up to the image, but seeing through the image altogether. And that's a way of liberation. That's where you come back to the here and now, and you just, I am. Yeah. And this fundamental, this sense of I amness, before I'm this or that or here or when or where. And this is something, what people who meditate a lot will at some point realize. In my tradition, they speak of an experience called Banganyana, where the whole bodily structure dissolves. And it's a very interesting experience. Once you get there, what happens is your awareness becomes so subtle that at some point you don't even experience your body anymore. And you can't even distinguish between the body and the surroundings. So because you don't feel you're sitting on a cushion, you could be anywhere in the room. And at some point you cannot localize yourself. And the only thing that remains is I am. Because also the mind becomes still, no memories, no thoughts, no language, nothing. And in this stillness, that's where you realize the only thing I can say about myself is not what I am or who I am, but just the fact that I am. I am. It's just almost like a buzzing, presencing awareness, or a cognizing emptiness, you can give it words, but words cannot describe it. I think the best word I've ever seen, the best sentence I've ever seen, comes from the Bible. It says, be still and know that I'm God. And I always get goosebumps when I talk about that, because in that stillness, I'm like, yeah, that's it. But then again, people are like, God doesn't exist, God does exist, and they're fighting about these images that they have of what God is. But you can't talk about what it is, because it's beyond concepts.
I think the most fundamental truths aren't there to be talked about, but they are there to be felt, to be experienced.
I think it's even beyond experience. Because experience, again, is in the most fundamental sense, you can almost say that an experience is somehow a bit of a disturbance. There's even something that goes beyond experience, that's absolute nothingness. But that absolute nothingness is also a fullness. And then it gets manifested in experience and sensations and things. But there's even something prior. And I think this I amness is... People often say that it's happiness or joy. I think it's a quiet joy, but I would say it's even prior to that. When I'm in the stillness, the reaction to it is joy. But the stillness itself is so quiet, so nothing, that it's so full, that the response to it is joy and happiness. It's as if everything clicks. There's a deep harmony. And then to know that harmony is to be overfilled with joy. But I would say the joy is a reaction to it. Mm-hmm. So that's how I experience for myself.
Yeah, beautiful.
Joy is the expression of that.
It's something so, maybe peace in a sense
Yeah, they talk about the peace that how do you say that? The peace that surpasses understanding. Yeah, I like to refer to as a kind of a quiet joy. Quiet in the sense it's not excitement. People often think of happiness as excitement, but that's very fleeting. It's a peak experience. This is something different. And you can't say much about it. It's a kind of a spaciousness, or sunyata, which is like emptiness, or even the emptiness of emptiness. You could go even further, but then you run into the limits of language.
Yeah. There's a couple of documentaries on samadhi, which I think one of them is called The Pathless Path. It kind of touches on what we talked about before, like this there's nothing to get to. There's nothing to seek to realize. There's just the being.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really liked thinking, well, I watched both films, but like halfway through the first film or something, they say like, if you now get it, stop watching.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to understand it further.
Yeah. But that's very hard for the Western mind, especially for the Western mind, because we are very intellectual, rational. We want to grasp it intellectually. We want to get it. When I came out of the retreat, I went to Maastricht. I stayed a couple of days in the area there just to relax a little bit. And there's this beautiful bookstore called Dominikanen Boekhandel. It's in a church, and I was just sitting there, like watching people. And then a man came to me, and he felt the need to speak to me, because and we started talking about religion. He was very religious, and we talked about the spiritual traditions and what religion is, at least how I experience religion, and we had a wonderful conversation. At some point, he said to me, like, yeah, if I could, he was retired. He said, if I could choose again my career, I would become a theoretical physicist because I want to know the truth. And I looked at him and I said, and what do you think knowing the truth will bring you? If you know it with your mind, would it change you? Yeah, I don't know. And we had and then we got into a conversation about what is actually truth. And we, especially the Western mind, is very. There's a great book written by Erich Fromm on Zen Buddhism, together with, I think, D.T. Suzuki, but I always mix up the two. There are two Suzukis. One is a more academic, and the other one is really a Zen master. But anyway, one of them. And they wrote a book together on Zen Buddhism. And to make a distinction between the Western and the Eastern mind, they used two poems. One was written by a British guy in 1800, and the other one was written by a Zen Buddhist in 1600 called Basho. The Western poem was about, they were both about flowers. One was about a flower, and then the poet said, oh, I don't remember, beautiful flower, I pluck you from the wall. If I could understand what you are, I could know God. And then the Zen Buddhist one was, if I look closely at the Nazuna, I can see it blossoming. I got goosebumps whenever I think about it. It's just the experience of the flower. It's in there. It's not in trying to grasp it and then kill it while you're plucking it and then dissecting it and finding it. Because what we do, the Western scientific mind, is what science does is it studies how nature behaves. And based on that, it can do predictions, it can create technology, which is wonderful. But it doesn't study what nature is. It studies the appearances, the outside. Even brain studies, neuroscience, it's about looking how nature behaves. But these spiritual traditions are about something different. They're about being, it's more an experiential understanding rather than an intellectual understanding.
Yeah.
And I think I thought there was a beautiful distinction between these two ways of looking at it. And that also ties into the work of what Ian McGilchrist is one of the, I think, great philosophers of our time. He wrote two massive books, The Master and His Emissary and The Matter with Things. I studied them both, and it's about the left and the right hemisphere of the brain and how we are becoming more dominant with the left hemisphere of the brain, which is very which abstracts things, which creates a map of reality. And then we start believing that the map is a reality. Whereas the right hemisphere is more embodied. It experiences life. It makes contact with reality through the senses. And that's a different kind of truth. That's a truth that corresponds with experience. And the left hemispheric truth is a kind of a factual truth, written down, black and white, which is not the truth that the spiritual traditions talk about. It's not the truth that transforms. It's, yeah. Anyway, I keep talking. Just,
I love it. And it feels like that left hemisphere truth, to give it a name, feels like it's something that, it lives very much in the brain and in this whole, you talk about both maybe left and right parts of the brain, but in the sense of like, it's like mental concept. And in that sense, there's always more to analyze. There's always more to sort of, parts to try to understand about it. And there's like endless discussions to be had. Whilst if something is an experience and you feel it in your entire body, someone else can try to convince you it's something else. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
You're not open to that because you've experienced something deeper.
And I think this touches upon something very fundamental, which is the difference between curiosity and wonder. Because we are very fascinated. And we could even talk about the word fascination, which is interesting. But we are very fascinated with curiosity. We always like curiosity leads to innovation, and this is all fantastic. But curiosity is the mind that grasps, it wants to understand it, wants to know it. But wonder is something different. When you're in wonder, you're just in awe. There's no curiosity there. There's just the witnessing, the experience. It's when you experience a sunset, and you're just there. It's when I was walking in the retreat last week. I was sitting on the bench, and a bird came to me, like 30 centimeters from me. I just looked at the bird. He looked at me. It was just an encounter with an animal. There was such a tremendous sense of wonder there, like how beautiful this experience. It was not like the mind that is curious, like, wow, what is this bird? And then you try to dissect it. And that's why in Zen they say, when a child sees a bird, and the mother say, that's a bird, from that moment on the child never sees a bird again. What it sees is the concept bird. So the first part is the cognition part. Cognition is realizing something is going on. There's a fantastic flying magical creature coming to me. And then mom said, oh, that's a bird. And then all of a sudden the whole magical experience is conceptualized into a label bird. And then whenever the child sees a bird, it's, I know it, bird.
Instead of actually looking at it.
And instead of actually experiencing it. Yeah. And that's how we almost color the entire world, or that's what the left hemisphere does. It conceptualizes the entire world, and before you know, you live in the conceptual realm, and you think you're in reality, but you're not actually experiencing reality as it is. The raw sensation of just being in contact with reality. And this is something I think we are losing, or we've lost, and a lot of people long for that, sometimes even without knowing. Because I think most of our desires come, and this is what John Klein of Advaita teaches us, all of our desires stem from one desire. It's to come home, to be at peace. And this peace is also a sense of connectedness, to be connected. And I feel a strong sense of connection in this conversation, which is peaceful. And I think this connectedness is what many people long for. And I heard one philosopher once say that, I think that's a beautiful description, even though painful. He said what we are suffering from, especially in the West, is a global intimacy disorder. We lost the art of intimacy, and intimacy in the spiritual sense. The Zen master Dogen said, enlightenment is just intimacy with all things. It's a very nearness, at oneness with whatever you're experiencing, with the outside world. And this sense of oneness, or at oneness, is I think what many people are longing for, what I'm longing for, and that's why I started practicing meditation.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. Like that, I sense that I long for that as well, and like I've had one experience that wasn't with meditation, but with an ayahuasca ceremony where I experienced and saw in different ways that between all our shapes and all our different, we call it materials, that everything around us is made of, that we are seem to be made of, is the same like liquid light kind of. That was how I was shown at that moment. But like there's this same energy, this same beingness that is in everything. And I realized like it gave me so much wonder and peace in that moment to be shown that this is actually what is within everything. And then yet as we step back into, let's say, the normal, or maybe it's not normal, but the world that we live in, then it's easy to lose this sense. And I've sensed that I yearn for it more and more. And then there's moments where I can grasp it, and especially moments when I let go and where there's space, time, stillness, then you sense it again. Yet it's always there. Yet it's really hard to always stay in touch with it.
Yeah, there are several reasons, and I started smiling. You said the real world, or I don't know what word you used.
The normal world is perhaps not normal. Yeah.
When I was in this retreat last week, there was a long-time server. He had been working there voluntarily for a long time, and he was about to go home. And then someone said, "Oh, so you're going back to the real world?" And he looked at him. He said, "It doesn't get more real than this." And I thought that was funny. But anyway, so. Yeah. What you're talking about is what in many spiritual traditions, especially in Advaita tradition, they talk about as luminosity. Luminosity is like the light of consciousness, which pervades everything, and everything is made out of it. And that can only be found, that's always here. And one of the easiest ways to connect to that is through the body, because the body is always here. The sensations are live sensations, they're here. So that's happening, but it's very hard to get disconnected. I remember a few years ago, I was meditating for a long time, and then immediately, it was, I think, like a 10-day course as well, and I came out of it on a Saturday, and on a Monday morning, I had like 3 or 4 Zoom meetings with clients, and within like a minute or 3 already in the meeting, I was completely in my head. Everyone was busy, quickly running through meetings, and I was like, what's everyone doing? But then I immediately adjusted my pace to them and felt like, oh, I need to be in a hurry, I need to be quick. And then I realized, wait a minute, what am I doing? Let's stay back. Let's stay where I am, and not get just. But it's very seductive almost to go into that stream, and it happens automatically. Another thing is, if you want to be present, one of the things that blocks presence is because there's something we are feeling that we don't want to feel. We want to hide from ourselves. And then you can also not connect with the other person because there's something that you're trying to hide, you don't want to see, so you disconnect. The other person can sense it. There's a disconnect. So I think the practice there is to be with what is and connect with what is there. And then you can bring yourself back to presence. But this is very difficult. I mean, I can talk about this now in this beautiful setting, and but I'm also struggling with that. And that's why it's always a return. And what I find beautiful about the practice is the more you practice, the faster the return happens. And I think that's where the progress in the spiritual path happens. And something like that.
Yeah, I agree. To the fact that I've experienced what you talk about, like, I've had phases of being intrigued with this concept of enlightenment. First it's like, oh, it's woo woo. Then it's like, that's the place to get to. Then it's like, oh, maybe it's not a place to get to. It's more like an experience that you can sort of flow in and out of every now and then. And then it's even more of like, oh, it's actually, well, what you touched on earlier is like, it is perhaps not this being perfect in a sense. It's not that you're actually becoming anything else. It's about seeing what you already were. It's about just learning to be with what is. But I'm curious, like with your, what is it, 8 vipassanas and all the stuff that you've read and wrote about, like how would you describe this concept of enlightenment?
Well, what I find funny about the concept of enlightenment, the word sounds very magical, like exotic and fantastic. So it's I think it's brilliant. Why? Because the ego thinks, I want that. And then you start meditating and it's almost as this allure. Once I have that, then all my troubles are over. And then you start meditating to get that, and you want to get enlightened. But somewhere along the way, you start realizing, wait a minute, all this thought about enlightenment is taking me away from the present moment, right here. And then it's almost as if the ego is like, wow, I'm going to get there. And along the way, it starts facing its own disappearance in the process. And then, so to want enlightenment is to just get further away from it, because it's in the wanting that you keep searching, keep going. And I want to be very strict here. It's not that I've experienced enlightenment I mean, if we want to know what it is, we should ask the Buddha, but he doesn't live anymore, his body, so we can't ask him. But there are very different conceptualizations of enlightenment. I mean, for example, in the Soto Zen tradition, they talk about, especially Zen Master Dogen talks about practice enlightenment. That says that the practice itself is already the enlightenment. You're already there. There's nothing to achieve. That resonates more with me. The reason is because that it's helpful to get as long as you think there's this great stage that I'm going to experience one day, then you're not just paying attention to what is here. And what I like about the Zen tradition is that they call it by different names, but in Zen they speak of how easy it is to get to heaven, but how hard it is to come back to earth. And coming back to earth, that's it. I mean, we can climb to mountains to find the sacred, only to come back home and find it in the doing of the dishes. I mean, that's it. So when we think of enlightenment as this fantastic bliss feeling that we will have, and then, wow, we are in heaven, that's not the point. That's just an experience. That's beautiful. I've had many of those experiences where I felt like blissful. But even Jung wrote about it in his spiritual work on alchemy. He wrote about the several stages of the alchemical process, looking at it from a psychological lens. And one of these phases, the white stage, it's called the monastery phase. And Jung said about it, in a state of whiteness one cannot live. In order to live, something needs blood. And then you get into the rubedo, the red phase, which means to go back to earth and to live, actually. So that's why in many of these traditions, going back to earth and to live and to do the dishes, and that's the real work. The real work is not when you're longing for some great liberation or blissful stage, but where you're just totally happy, or not even happy, but totally at one with the doing of the dishes. You're content with whatever is going on. That's what we talked about earlier, the equanimity. Equanimity is just being with whatever is. So to not develop aversion against painful or unpleasant sensations, and not to develop craving or clinging to pleasant sensations. That's the peace right there. And that can be very subtle. That's not this fantastically like a liberating phase. I mean, I've been there. Last year I had a phase where I went to a very difficult period in my life. I went to a retreat and I had the toughest things going, because I was also in a very tough education program, 3-year program in the Netherlands called Phoenixopleidingen. And they always talk about the second year is like you fall into the abyss and you had to get out of it. And I fell into it fully. And then a big liberation came in a retreat as well. Because what happened is a relationship that I wanted to have work that didn't work out. I spent a lot of my savings on writing this book, and then it didn't sell much, so I needed to do freelance work. I was in a very stressful period, and a lot of generational trauma things came up through the education program. All of it came together, and then I went to this retreat, and it was just so intense, but it also kind of caused or triggered a very big liberation, because at day 4 or 5, I got into such a painful, like almost reliving memories from childhood that came to the surface. And I looked at myself and I was like, I am so worthless. I hate myself. Like these thoughts came up, like very deep. And I was so miserable. And then at one point, a sentence came to mind. Through whose eyes are you looking at yourself when you say I'm worthless? And then I saw myself as a 5-year-old looking through myself through the eyes of my parents or other people. And then I was like, wait a minute, I'm not even looking through my own eyes. And then I was looking through my own eyes, and I was sitting there, and I was like, I don't hate myself. And I started smiling, and all of a sudden it was as if a spell was broken. And for like 2 months, I was in this blissful stage. I was like a child. I felt like Eckhart Tolle. I could only sit on a couch in the Vondelpark, and I just wanted to smile at people, and people were smiling at me. And for a moment, I thought like, I'm there. You know, I have this stage. But then things happen, and that falls away. And then I got into, and then I learned again, that's not the practice. The practice is not to be in this stage. The practice is just to remain with whatever is going on. So that was for me one of the most humbling experiences. I went from deep suffering to bliss, and then back to like crashing down to earth again, and then realized, oh yeah, I need to have a job. So I found a really nice job, and that was very humbling. And I think this humility is also very important in the spiritual path. One of the teachers, I forgot his name, I think Trungpa Rinpoche, a very controversial figure, but he said, don't trust the spiritual warrior who doesn't have a broken heart. I think to have the broken heart is what makes us humble. And that also has to do with facing one's mortality, I think. There's a great insight in the Jungian literature on mythology, that the hero is the immature variant of the warrior. Why? Because the hero denies his own mortality. He's too grandiose. He wants to save his mother still, psychologically often. Right. But the warrior is the one who has faced his mortality, and the one is willing to die for his life, the other one is humbly living for a cause. And that's because the warrior has faced his or her mortality. And I think that's very important. It's the humility we need, that we are, as they say in some traditions, be bold because you're made of stars, be humble because you're made of earth. It's this dual aspect. And I think in a lot of spiritual circles that I see, it's all focused on this heavenly state. And then we kind of ignore the other one. That's why they say in Zen, after the ecstasy, the laundry. You know, just get back to work and do what's necessary.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, you just become the simple man or woman on the market again. Nothing special. And because you don't need to be special.
I'm reminded of the word guru, which I believe the two parts, gu and ru, means dark and light. And they can they can be interpreted, or have been interpreted a lot. I've heard it in that sense of the one that turns darkness into light. But then it in the translation, in a sense, is this sense of we have to get somewhere, have to do something. And there's another interpretation that is the one that has integrated both light and darkness, which I like a lot more.
Yeah.
It speaks of this more peacefulness of everything that's here.
Yeah. And integration is, I think, well said, because when these dark energies, I wouldn't even call them dark energies, but when like more the stronger forces like the sex drive, anger, they're very hard to control, but people try to control them, but you're not going to win that. But integration is more like, hey, they're there. They're part of us, but don't give them free reign. Again, what we talked about, you observe them, and that creates a spaciousness around them. And I think that's way more healthy, because otherwise you suppress it. And then what happens, you get dissociated, which means you don't have full access to your life energy. You see that I used to be very dissociated when I was younger, and I still sometimes, if I don't pay attention, I get dissociated quickly when I get overwhelmed. And then I always notice that I become a bit blank. Like I'm there, but I'm not really there. And then I realize, I'm not there. And often I have to grieve about something, or there's some pain that I haven't been willing to face. And once I go there, or I talk with a friend, and it opens up, then I'm there again. And then I can connect again. So I think that's the way.
Always after grieving, or in a sense expressing anger, but for me it's recently been more grief that's come up. It's really actually nice to cry.
It's liberating. It is absolutely liberating.
Yeah, there's really this sense of there's access to more breath, there's more space, both within myself and around me. It's like less tension in my body, like it's almost like I'm feeling a bit larger in a way. Like it's so interesting, like because something was contracting within me, something was trying to hold me down in a sense. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I remember when I started the Phoenix opleiding, I can't call it Phoenix in English for English listeners. I talked to one of my teachers and I said, I've always been seeking. And she said to me, the seeker often has still something to do with grief, untaken grief. And that was so true, because in year 2, I realized how much unprocessed grief I had in my system, of things that happened in my youth, or things I wanted to have happened that didn't happen. There was so much grief. And when all of that came out, I realized why they say in my education program that unprocessed grief is like frozen love. And once you start grieving, you feel really like your heart is melting, and it starts flowing again, and you can feel love again. Because love, this flow of energy, it's as if that was frozen, and you become a bit hard, like the ice queen in the movies, or the ice king could even be. They have this hard they're indifferent.
Yeah.
I think indifference is kind of frozen love. It's a disconnect in some sense, and through grief we can open up again, and then we can. What I notice after grief is that desires, like healthy desires, the desire to live, the desire to expand, to create, to write, all that inspiration comes back, and I want to go out there and talk to people. But when I have unprocessed grief in me, I become very withdrawn from people. So I think that always resonated with me when she said it's like unprocessed grief is like frozen love. I think that's really true.
Yeah, beautiful. You touched earlier, and I forgot the name, but we're going to get there. Something I'm interested about, I think this was from Indian practice, or it was not. There was a certain thing that you talked. I think you touched on it twice, like this ancient wisdom from India. But I'm not sure. Can you maybe
Advaita, or
yes? Can you tell more about that?
Well, Advaita is a very ancient Indian philosophy, which refers to the Vedas and the Upanishads, which are like the ancient scriptures. And Advaita literally means not two. And there's Advaita Vedanta, which is Vedanta means, I think it means knowledge or self-knowledge. I forgot it exactly. But in these traditions, it's also a spiritual tradition where the point is total liberation, and this liberation comes when you see through the illusion of this mind-made self, this egoic structure, and you come back to this I amness. And it has become popular in the West through some 20th century teachers. Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, Atmananda Menon, if I remember correctly. I didn't look him up a lot. But I explored a lot of these teachings, and there are a lot of modern teachers, such as Rupert Spira, for example. Jean Klein was an Advaita teacher as well. And they talk often about the direct path, this immediate recognition of your true nature, which is not something you become. It's what's essentially there, always the case, ever present. And it's often referred to as eternity. But we in the West think of eternity as like everlasting time. You know, they lived happily eternally, like forever.
Yeah.
But eternity means ever present now. It is the ever present reality right here, right now, which no one has ever been able to escape. And I would even say that before anything happened, before the universe was born and after the universe, it's still now. Yeah. And now is not a moment in time. And now is that which transcends and includes time. It's timelessness in some sense. And if you can recognize this timeless, your essential nature, which is timeless, meaning ever present, right here, right now, then you are liberated from this suffering. Because in the Indian traditions, what they speak of is that this suffering is caused by our attachment to a false sense of self. And once you see through that, then the suffering drops. It doesn't mean there's no more pain, but there's no one there to suffer from it.
Yeah.
And a story to illustrate this comes from the Buddha. I think my teacher talks about this in one of the courses called the Satipatthana course, which is based on the Satipatthana Sutta, words of the Buddha. And in it, if I remember correctly, the Buddha is traveling to a village, and he meets someone on the street who is almost enlightened. And then Buddha says something, and then he realizes his true nature. And the Buddha says, in hearing, there's only hearing. In seeing, there's only seeing. And that's the essence. We think there's a me that sees, but if you start inquiring, and this is what the Advaita tradition does, it's self-inquiry in the sense that who is this I that is seeing? Not to find the I, but to realize there is no I to be found. There's only seeing. There's only sensing. There's only the activity. It's not even an activity. There's only presence.
I think Alan Watts talks about this happening.
It's happening, yeah.
He says, like, in one of his guided meditations I enjoy a lot, like, really helped me and as I was starting to meditate more, where he's like, okay, you put your attention on your thoughts and you realize that you don't control them. You can maybe like create thoughts, but they're also there when you don't try. Yeah. And it's like, but like try not to give names to them, but just let them be and see it as a happening. Yeah. And it's the same with sounds around you. Everything is just a continuous happening. And it's like our brain wants to name things and wants to put them in boxes. And like you expressed with the bird, like, then it becomes a concept and we can, have a thought about it or let it go or, give it like a space in our, let's say, map of existence. But actually it's all just a happening. Yeah. And there's not really a distinction between what is happening within us and what's happening outside of us. And it's like we are only sort of, in a sense, we are happening. Yeah. Perhaps. We are like... Yeah, we are absolutely... That's true. And the Buddhists say, they talk about sunyata or emptiness, which means that it's like a... how would you say that in English? Everything is co-arising. There's no entity here that is separate from everything else. Everything is codependent in the sense that there is... My teacher used to say, you can only exist because the whole universe exists. It's a one continuous happening. And what I found so funny about my teacher, I had a mentor for about 4 years who taught me everything about these traditions. He was near the end of his life, and I met him in Vondelpark just a week after I prayed to have a mentor. And then I saw him sitting there, and I was like, I looked at him, he looked at me, and I just
saw that he knows stuff that I don't know yet. he had this almost like shining, glimmering face. He felt very peaceful. So I approached him. He said, "Do you want a drink?" He said, "Oh, that would be lovely." So, and then we had a 2-hour conversation. He became my teacher for about 4 years, or like a spiritual friend. And he used to say, like, everything in nature permanently changes, except these stupid convictions in our mind, these thoughts and these ideas and beliefs. But once they become like the body, permanently changing, then we get liberated. We don't identify with these thought structures. And I think that's what these traditions invite us to, is they open us up to some radical openness, actually. And what we often do when we feel bad in the West is we try to reframe the story, like into a positive story, which can help. But what they do in the East is they deframe altogether. Just be there with the raw experience. And about these things happening, it's very interesting. Once you are, there's a concept in the Tao Te Ching called Wu Wai Wu, which means doing, non-doing. And often when people are in flow, they can get to that kind of excitement. When you're in flow, things are just happening. You're doing what needs to be done. You're razor sharp. You are in the flow. There's no sense of self. This I is silent.
Yeah, it's automatically.
And things are happening. And I realize that mostly when I give lectures or public speaking, when I'm fully at one with the audience and I'm speaking, it's not that I think about what am I going to say. And I can feel it now in this conversation. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say. These words just come out now. Right. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what's coming. My teacher used to say when I said, could you please recall what you just said to me? He said, I don't know if I can, because the words come when they come and they go when they go and they're not there when they're not there. And then he smiled at me. And that, I think, is what is referred to with spontaneity. Spontaneity is when we let this thing go. But we often think of spontaneity as like impulsive. But that's something else. That's like a reactive mind. Our modern like popcorn mind that's very impulsive and that runs after the iPhone and then it runs after this and runs. That's not the spontaneity that we talk about. The spontaneity we talk about is to be really connected, in resonance, and then in these conversations, there's like really a dialogos going on. Like logos, like the manifestation of the divine principle or truth that's going on, that's almost in the middle, in the in-betweenness. And I think that's where this spontaneity, the real spontaneity comes. And then it's just a happening. You're kind of there, you're fully immersed, and yet you're free from the outcome. You're not sticking to a certain outcome, because if you are stuck to a certain outcome, you don't have a true conversation. It's almost like propaganda. You want to steer it some way and it becomes opportunistic.
Yeah. And you're actually blocking the flow.
You're blocking the flow, yeah.
You're in a sense, I don't know, like you're putting a log in the river to get to that certain place and you disrupt the natural flow of the river. Yeah.
And it's almost like having no agenda.
Yeah. You touched on it a little bit here and there, like this sense of things are just happening. We talked about now, like, but then if you're in that space, if you can sort of in that maybe surrender more to life's unfolding instead of trying to control it and steer it so much. I've experienced that when you're in that state of being, something else kind of takes over or directs you, steers you, helps you in a sense. And I can't really, my mind can try to think of concepts of why this is happening. I don't really care so much about that. It's more like this sense of magic of life, of something deeper underneath, where all of a sudden, like these moments we all recognize, where you think of someone and that person calls you, even though you maybe haven't had contact in months, or the moment that there's a certain element in nature that gives you exactly a hint of a direction you need to go, or a confirmation or a message that you need. Like these synchronicities. It's such an interesting thing, and it feels to me like if we can be in that state and in a sense appreciate that we are not separate, but like we talked about, connected
There's a greater
to
intelligence going on that we,
exactly. Like then it's like, can we then surrender to this force and this intelligence that actually maybe knows better what life wants to do than us?
And that takes a lot of courage. I mean, if I speak for myself, I used to live very intuitively, but that also means you have to let go of the outcome. And it's very hard if you live in especially in Amsterdam, where everything is very expensive. You need to pay your rent. So for me, it's the way I dealt with it for a long time is when I still had my own business. I had one day in a week, that was my day off. I called it my intuition day. So I just woke up and I just followed my intuition the whole day, wherever it led me. And it always led me, or not always, but many times it led me to like things that I needed without even knowing. And then the other days were just for practical work, getting my stuff done. So I could kind of, it's like a organized chaos in some sense, like sometimes I call it K-order, like the border between chaos and order. It's not full chaos, because if I let everything go fully, it takes a lot of courage, because you don't know the outcome. I mean, with this book, I remember sitting in a meditation retreat, and the title came to me, and I was like, I need to write that book. And then it started writing itself in my mind. And at some point, I lived off my savings. And I remember at some point, my savings were almost finished, but my book wasn't. And I was like, how am I going to finish the book? I cannot stop now and start working, because I'm in the midst of it. And then on the most miraculous way, I needed about 750 euros to pay one more rent. And then I was sure I needed a couple of more weeks to finish the book. And all of a sudden, in a weird way, I got 850 euros. And I was like, okay, that was helpful.
Yeah.
So I could finish the book, and then I could do freelance work again. But you can't arrange that. And where I want to make a distinction, I think this is helpful. I'm not such a fan of this new age manifesting stuff, like The Secret. The reason for that is because it tends to create this belief that I am manifesting this. And then again, you get into this ego inflation. I am the creator. I'm God. I manifest this. No, you surrender to it. The universe manifests it in some sense. And that also keeps one humble. I'm not arranging this. I can't even control that. These things happen. They may be guides or not, these synchronicities. I've had many of them in my life, but only when I'm willing to let go. And when I acknowledge I'm not the one creating this. Because if I start feeling, and I've had these moments where I had very clear moments where I all of a sudden got an intuition why I thought a friend of mine was sick, or when I was had an insight that was necessary for someone, I gave it and it helped. And then all of a sudden I felt like I am doing this, and then poof, I'm out of the stage again. Because then it is the ego that gets inflated. Right. And this is what I see a lot with this kind of manifesting gurus. I mean, the people who get the most rich from all these manifesting things are the ones who write the books and sell the courses.
It's so true.
And I found that a bit. I think it's
like
more humble to say, hey, this is something I cannot control. It's beautiful when it happens. I see it as little gifts. But when I start thinking that I'm creating those gifts, I make myself way too big. Yeah.
It feels like a pyramid scheme in a sense. If it's like that, it's like,
it has a bit of a flavor of impurity sometimes. I mean, we all need to make our living, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a middle way again.
One thought just came up. Is like, because I've at some point looked at it like that, like I studied The Secret and all this other stuff, and it's like it is fascinating to experience some of these moments, but then it's like, is it that I am thinking of these things and then manifesting them, and I'm thinking of these things because I'm enthusiastic about them, right?
But who is this I that is thinking?
Well, that's another question, but like, Or is the fact that I'm experiencing this excitement about certain things, is that me tuning into what wants to happen anyway?
Yeah.
And in that sense, because it's not that it's going to happen because I'm focusing on it. It's because I'm learning to tune to what wants to happen anyway. Maybe that's
Jung wrote a lot. I mean, he coined the term synchronicity. He wrote a work on synchronicity, and what he found out is that synchronicities tend to happen more often when you are emotionally attached to something. That you have a emotional engagement with what you're doing, like enthusiasm. It's beautiful. If you look at the word enthusiasm, it comes from entheos, which means to be in God. It's this divine, emotional, like intuitive, like. It doesn't happen when you think like, oh, I really want $1 million. It's about something that feels so true to you that you feel that needs to be done, or that you really want to do. And I noticed in my life that it worked like that. To give you an example with my first book, Nothing You Don't Already Know. This is a funny story I always share with people. If it takes a few minutes, if that's okay to share.
Of course.
But I was starting just to write. I remember I had this Instagram account called Leader Quotes, where I shared like quotes from people that had inspired me. And at some point I got very inspired. This was like 15 years ago. I started writing, and I sometimes put quotes that I wrote in my feed. And then people started liking them, and some went viral. And I was like, this resonates with people. So I started my own account at a certain point where I had a lot of content where I started writing. And at some point, someone in the comments said to me, hey, I really like your Instagram page. If you make a book out of it, I would buy it. So I was like, hey, that's interesting. That would be nice. So I had this idea in my mind. But then I was like, okay, what kind of book will it be? Because I'm not very, I don't know many Instagram pages that turn into a book. I don't know any of them. But I remember that I once read this little booklet called, it's by Paul Arden. It's not how good you are, it's how good you want to be. It's a small booklet with some black pages with little big white quotes and then a bit of text. And I always liked that book. It fitted in my back pocket, and I like that, to walk around in my jeans with a book in my pocket so I can walk around and sit anywhere and just read a book. I really loved that book. And I thought, I'm going to write a book in that kind of, not design, but that size. I really like that. But if you're going to write a book, you need chapters, you need kind of a storyline. And what I had is just random stuff that I posted online that I thought that inspired me. I thought maybe it inspires someone else. So how do you make a book out of that? So what I did is I printed all these texts, I put them in my room, and I was like, how am I going to make chapters? So first I thought in themes, and I looked at, I got some themes are really about success. Others are more about courage. So I had success, courage, and I had some themes and it didn't work because success were like 10 pieces, and then courage had 2. I was like, I need something. I got so frustrated at some point. So I went to my girlfriend at the time. This was, I think, in 2015 maybe, or 16. And I remember we had dinner, but I couldn't concentrate because in my mind all these quotes and it didn't let me go. I was frustrated. I needed to find out, how do I make up chapters? The next morning I was at her place, and it was like a 15-minute bicycle trip from her place to mine. So in the morning I went back to my home. I was on Kinkerstraat in Amsterdam, and all of a sudden I felt that it let me go, and I was free again. And I had an intuition, like a hunch, to go to a coffee room instead of going home, just to sit there and have a coffee. So I saw a coffee place. I went in there. And it so happened that there was a girl sitting there that I used to work with for about 1 month. Like, just enough to say hi, but not enough to really have a hey, how are you? So I was doubting, should I say hi or not? And something said, just have a chat with her. So I had a chat with her. And I said, how's it going? Good. How's your life? Yeah, I'm trying to write a book, and I'm annoyed, blah, blah. I was sharing the story. And there was another man sitting there, and he heard that. And he entered the conversation. And then all of a sudden she was like, oh, I'm late for a meeting. I have to run. Bye. And I was stuck with this guy. And I told him, I said, I'm writing this book. And in my mind, I have a bit of an idea of what it should look like. I have this idea of a book by Paul Arden. It's not how good you are, it's how good you want to be. He looked at me. He said, no way. He said, I published a book with the same idea in mind. I was like, no way. How out of millions of books? So he said, oh, I have it with me. So he took his book called Spiritual Awakening the Easy Way by Tim van der Vliet. And I said, that's exactly something I'm writing, at least in format, you know?
Yeah.
He said, oh, you can have it. Use it. So what I did, I opened it. I saw his chapters. And what he did, the process of spiritual awakening, he captured that in chapters. And I was like, of course, why didn't I see that? I was looking at themes, you know, to try to look what is my text about. But of course, it's my own process. So if I just go back to my process and capture that, then definitely I will find the right pages. So I went home. Out of intuition, I wrote down 7 chapters. I was like, okay, it started off, I was in a place where I didn't want to be. So a call for change. Then leaving the ordinary. And then, face your fears. I wrote it down, 7 chapters. I got back to my text. Everything fitted in those chapters. And I was like, bam, I got it. And afterwards, I was like, how synchronistic. Yeah. I didn't know how to come up with the chapters. I had this hunch to go into a coffee room. I meet a guy randomly who published a book similarly, who gave me the answer. Only after I let it go.
Yeah.
And I think that to me was a message of, are you willing again to let it go? If it needs to be done, you will find a way. So for me, that was like, and again, not to make that into another story. Like next time when that's going to happen, I do it like this because then it will happen again. No, it's not like that. It's more like trust and courage. But for me, those kind of experiences always are like gifts of the universe to me.
Yeah.
I don't try to explain them like, because that's the rational mind that wants to understand how can this work, but then you lose yourself in all kind of theoretical concepts.
Yeah.
For me, it's just like, that's a gift, beautiful, and now I can move on.
Yeah, I've had many similar things as well, and it's like it feels like you're tapping into something bigger than yourself. And I've had moments where it was like, it's really interesting to analyze it, but actually, at some point, I feel like I chose to like I don't want to. I want to just experience the magic, and by analyzing it, we are actually, to my experience, destroying the magic in a sense. If we're taking it apart, we can't see it anymore. Really, we can't feel it.
That's it. Yeah. And I think today it's even worse because our attention is constantly being hijacked. So we don't develop the skill of being present and aware. I mean, I had this realization just last week where I thought of the story of the Bible of Adam and Eve. You know, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The serpent seduces them to eat for Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what was the promise? You'll have the power of the gods. Who can resist that temptation? You know, no one can. So they eat. Then I thought deeply about what is today's equivalent of having the power of the gods at the hand. And I looked at my phone, or in my mind. Who can resist the phone? No one can. When I went back, I was sitting in a coffee corner. Everyone was on their phones, glued to the screens. Because it's the promise of having the power of the gods in your hands. And even today with AI, you know, we are made to believe that we create this. Everyone can now become a writer, a photographer, and it's so tempting. And it's so in your face. I mean, if you look at the logo on the back of your iPhone, it's an apple with a bite out of it. How obvious do you want the symbolism to be?
It's unbelievable. Yeah, I realized this like a year ago. I was like, oh my God.
and so that's why I think the true power of the gods is measured by the ability to not use it. To say no, to resist it. I mean, look at all the great sages of the past. They were all tempted by the power of the gods. They were all tempted by all these things, and they were not interested.
That's power.
So if you want a spiritual practice, this is a fantastic spiritual practice. Lock yourself in a room with nothing there to distract yourself, except your iPhone. Put it on the table. Sit there and meditate for 1 hour without using it. See if you can do that. That's a great practice.
It's a beautiful invitation.
Yeah.
Love that. I feel like this is also a little bit of a bridge, like to another topic I'd love to get to with you. Was like this sense of, I heard you say in another podcast that there was a big research program that came to the conclusion, or like the finding, that only 9% of men in the Netherlands, or working people in the Netherlands, find that there's meaning in their job.
Yeah, I think it was a study from Gallup, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
They were fully engaged. Most of them were not fully engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been fascinated by this whole sense of that we seem to put more and more time into the wrong things, in a sense.
Mm.
Like, I've also, over the past couple of years, I've guided a lot of men in men's circles, and one of the things that comes up more, like quite a lot there also, is like this sense of a lack of meaning,
Mm-hmm.
and of a call, or a desire for something deeper, but it's really hard to grasp.
Yeah.
I'm curious, in all the stuff that you've read and experienced, like, how do you believe we get to more meaning in life?
If we look around to what you see today, most people don't do a more in-depth analysis of what's going on. I think what we are experiencing today is like the culmination of ideas that have already originated 200 or 300 years ago, maybe earlier. And Nietzsche foresaw this already when he said that we've killed God in 1882.
Mm.
He had this poem about the madman on the market who was running around, we've killed God, and everyone was like, yeah, so what? It's almost as now we are starting to see what he truly meant. Like, we've taken out the entire spiritual fundament out of a civilization, and now everything gets fragmented, and we start searching. We it's almost like the Tower of Babel. If you look at a religious sense, when we created the Tower of Babel, we want to almost climb to heaven. What God did, he punishes us, and everyone gets fragmented and speak different language. No one can talk to each other anymore. That's really what's happening.
Yeah.
No one can understand each other anymore. So that also ties into this global intimacy disorder. When there's no shared framework to which you see reality, it's really hard to create a sense of intimacy. But I think there's more going on. If you look at what's going on now, and I should not become too philosophical about this, it becomes very conceptual, but I think it's important to understand that what we see now, the main philosophical ideas are Romanticism and the Enlightenment, the Western Enlightenment. The Western Enlightenment was a reaction to the tradition. It's more atheistic. We're all just a bunch of energy and atoms coming together with no purpose. That's a more reductionist view. And then the Romanticism reaction to that. No. There's more to life than that. We need to find ourselves, our true selves, and then become that. But both are misguided. Mm. And a lot of people that I see in the spiritual circles today are just romanticists that also lived 200 years ago. The romanticists, when God was killed, so to speak. So what did they do? They had a big hole in their soul, so they projected onto a relationship. They needed to find their soulmate, which they couldn't find, because relationships, they come and go, the feeling. But their fundamental way of finding their place was feeling. Mm. But if you've ever looked at your feelings, they constantly change. But the idea within the romanticist was that there is a self, an unique individual that I need to find and then become. Now we're starting to find out, and they already found out 200 years ago, that there's nothing to find there. You keep searching. Then one day you're vegan, and then no, that doesn't really resonate anymore. I do something else, and then until that doesn't really resonate anymore, and then you have no ground to stand on. So what happened? Many of them went back to Christianity, or some went so isolated and nihilistic, committed suicide. And what do you see happening now, especially among these New Age spiritual people? A big trend to go back to Christianity.
Yeah.
It's because we need feet under our ground. It's the realization that I can't find this unique self because there is none. That's what the Buddha and all of them found out. There's nothing to find there. And I think that's where we get delusional. Even today, we start to identify ourselves with gender, for example. In Canada, I read that there are like now 300 genders that we identify with. But there's something again, a fantastic story about the Buddha. He got enlightened under the Bodhi tree. He was walking on the street. People saw something in him. And they said, "Sir, are you like a messenger or a god?" And he said, "No." "Are you a king?" "No." And they said, "Are you a man?" And he said, "No." And then probably they got a bit annoyed. They said, "Then what are you?" And he said, "I am awake." So no, he wasn't referring to an identity he has, like this is who I am. He was referring to the state of awakeness. And today we are so contaminated by this romanticist idea that there's a unique self that I need to find, which only leads to endless searching and searching and searching, which leads to depression, isolation, and lack of meaning. Because the more you think that you're a unique individual, the less you are able to learn from other people, because you think, yeah, but they're different individuals. I'm unique. I need to find my path. That's one way. There's a Dutch philosopher who wrote a great book on this called Andreas Kinneging, De Onzichtbare Maat in Dutch, about these philosophical ideas. So another thing that's happening is, again, tying back to this left hemisphere way of being in the world, which is very abstract, which creates a map of reality. So in other words, we start living more in our heads, and we start losing connection to the body. We start losing connection to one another. There's lack of resonance, lack of deep intimacy. So we are all struggling from this sense of meaning. And I work in a corporate world. I do a lot of leadership development, cultural transformation. And if I ask people what do they really want, they often say, we just want to feel more a sense of connection. But at the same time, they have targets to reach, KPIs. They always need to run there. But connection can only happen in the here and now, when you open up, when you're responsive. It cannot happen when you're on your way there, going somewhere. And I think a great philosopher who already saw this coming was a guy named Joseph Pieper, a German philosopher. And just after the Second World War, he wrote a massive essay called Leisure, the Basis of Culture, where he writes that the working world is becoming so dominant that it starts becoming all-encompassing, that it starts dominating our entire lives. And the mindset of the worker, is the utilitarian, is instrumental. You need to do something to get something, which is like the having mode of being. We need to get somewhere. But now, with this worker mindset, we even approach leisure as just a reset so we can recharge and we can work again.
Yeah.
And we forget that holidays used to mean holy days. There were days where you were not thinking about work, where you were present. And what's so great about the work of Joseph Pieper is that he traces back the word leisure to its original meaning. And I found out through that the word school, skole, from Greek, means leisure. Schools were places where you come together to contemplate. It's free time where you contemplate. Now they become performance factories to get a diploma. So everything is contaminated by this worker mindset, this instrumentalist left hemispheric mindset of getting something. Whereas true leisure is only possible when you're at one with yourself and your environment, where this is responsiveness, where I listen to you, when I'm willing to be moved by what you say, and where you're willing to be moved by what I say, and we feel a deep sense of resonance. And that resonance is nurturing. It's feeding the soul. And that doesn't mean leisure is doing nothing. The way Joseph conceptualizes leisure is these activities that you do for their own sake. So you making music. You don't make music to get to the end of the song. You make music for the sake of making music. You dance for the sake of dancing. You paint for the sake of painting. Those are activities that you do for their own sake. Also, Aristotle and Plato thought of those activities as the highest of activities. The lowest of activities were the utilitarian ones. You work to pay your bills, which is also important. But we have forgot these higher levels of deep contemplation, being present with one another. So, very simple example. Years ago, I was in Florida. I was asked by this company to join a leadership offsite and to do a few sessions with them. And the vice president of the company who invited me, he showed me very happily his planning for the 3 days. And I said, "What's the aim of the week?" "Yeah, we haven't seen each other for a long time, so we want to look at the business, but also connect. So we do laser gaming in the evening, we do this and that in the evening. And I looked at the agenda or the calendar, like from 8 to 6 in the morning, fully packed with presentations, workshops and things. And he said to me, like, what do you think of the schedule? I said, you want the polite answer or the real answer? He said, the real answer. I said, if you want to connect with people, then take like 2 or 3 hours out of it, give them free time, and let go of control. And he did that. So after lunch, from 2 to 5 or 3 to 6, I don't remember, or like 2 hours or 3 hours, he gave them free time. What happened? They started sitting in the hotel bar, talking to one another, like really connecting. And then they found out that they were working on a similar project, you know, and then it helped them understand each other. It made it easier for them to find one another later on, you know. These simple interventions can make such a difference, but you need to be willing to, again, let go of control, to open up. And that's what I see so many organizations struggling with. There's a big pressure on the workload. Mm-hmm. So the tendency is to start to do more with less stuff, so we get things done quicker, so we have more time left. But that's not how it works. It just creates more and more tension. So I see some very effective companies, what they do is that they decide to do less and take more time to do them well. I think there's something very important there.
Was it in Iceland that they did? I'm not sure if this is probably not nationwide, but they did like a really big experiment for, I think, something like a year, where people were not allowed to work for more than 5 hours a day. And before it was like 8 or more, like everywhere else. And it turned out that people were less sick. They needed to spend less money on people taking care of their kids because they were home more. They were happier. And the amount of work that got done was the same. It wasn't less.
It's interesting. It is interesting. What I find interesting in the Advaita tradition, this doing mode, I forgot the name, but they approach it more as a kind of a spirit. And for me, that makes a lot of sense, because if I'm in doing mode, it's like if I'm like engaged in some kind of spirit, I'm like really in a different flow, get things done, like working. But the problem with that is if we are too much in that, we can't let go of it anymore. Yeah. So what happens? We come home and we're still in this doing mode, and then we have to bring the kids to bed and it's like ticking off from the to-do list. Get this done. And we don't know how to relax anymore. We don't know how to just sit there on the couch for 20 minutes. Just enjoy your own presence. And I think that's wearing people out. People get into burnouts, you know, because they keep being in the spirit of having and doing and getting and grasping, and forgetting that there's a polarity, you know. To live healthily, you need to live in both polarities, doing and being, and not just one, because otherwise the other one, you know, and then your body will show you the signs that there's something to be done.
Yeah, hopefully in time before it gets really serious.
Yeah,
and I'm also thinking about, like, if that's the way you're living and you have kids, how are you programming them in a sense? You know, what is the example that you give them, or like what are they getting instilled into them as the norm? It's not something healthy.
If you think, and this is why I'm so sad, I can become very sad sometimes about what I see happening, because if you think what children need mostly is undivided attention and presence, and that's exactly what is lacking. And I remember Eckhart Tolle once talking about all these diseases or disorders that are like trumping, like ADHD. I don't know to what extent it is true, but it makes a lot of sense that it is also about having a lack of presence in the household. Because if there's deep presence, then the natural response of the nervous system is to relax. And if you're held in someone's presence, I mean, that's so calming. The nervous system, for example. But when there's no presence, we get very nervous. We develop a sense of relational alertness. We get all these like attachment problems, you know, because. But again, people who are not familiar with this presence, they think, what do you mean by presence, you know? Yeah. I saw this fantastic interview with Andrew Tate. You know, the guy that I understand why he is so charming to a lot of young people, But what I found so brilliant about the interview, it was with a therapist. And the therapist was so good because Andrew Tate, the kind of type that's completely identified with this image, and then lives up to this sense of grandiosity. What this therapist does is he slowly guides, he really acknowledges Andrew. A lot of interviewers are kind of getting triggered and it becomes a battle.
Yeah.
There's no battle because the therapist doesn't fight. He just accepts Andrew like in a very mature way. But then he slowly draws him into presence. But what Andrew is doing, he's constantly answering questions in such a way that his answer makes him look like he is the greatest. That's his model.
So
that's what you see happening.
Keep control of his image in a sense.
That's what's happening. But what at some point the therapist does is that he says, "What are you doing?" He just looks at him, and then Andrew is saying, "Yeah, I'm trying to argue." And then he said, "Why are you arguing? Just stop. Be present here with me." And then within a second, the leg of Andrew starts shaking. Because the biggest fear of the ego is presence. Because in presence you have to be. You can't hide behind the mask. And if you can't hide behind the mask, it's terrifying because you have to let go of the entire construct you've built your entire life. And in presence, that kind of thing melts. So presence is very terrifying in that sense. So slowly but surely he tries to draw them. But when they get to presence, and it's okay, thanks for the interview. He can't go there.
Wow, yeah.
And I see why, because it's terrifying, because you have nothing to hold on to, nothing to grasp. And again, that's also liberation.
Yeah. You saw the book on the table that's there, the presence process. I haven't started, I'm about to dive in. He describes, Michael Brown describes a lot, about this whole concept and this sort of, as you are, for people listening, like the invitation of the book is like to, and it requires a commitment. He says like, don't make any conclusions or pause before you've actually done the full 10 weeks. So it's 10 weeks of every day, twice a day, 15 minutes of connected breathing. And what this does is it brings up all the trauma and everything like other practices can do as well. And then it in the end, it draws you into presence. And he says like, it's very confronting and it's very, but if you go through these things, then eventually you will find this sense of, well, not just present as an activity, but as a state of being.
Yeah.
Like not trying to get to presence, but just being and don't needing to get anywhere else anymore.
It's like trying to get to presence. It's almost like you see some tendency going there, but it's almost as if, I think I read in the book, I forgot that it's just this tendency to seek peace. If we can just see that happening, that we're going, then that we're already there. It's like a pre-stage. But what you said, this is why it's so terrifying, because that's why people are so afraid of silence, because the demons come up. Mm-hmm. People don't like demons, and I don't like demons. They're terrifying. I remember when I started this education program, the Phoenix program, on day one, I came in quite arrogant, like I thought I did a lot on personal development already. And then we were made to walk around in the room, and then when the teacher said stop, you had to look at the person in front of you and said, what touches me in you is ...
Yeah.
And then at some point I was standing in front of the male teacher, and he looked at me and said, what touches me in you is the little boy that wants to be found. And immediately it resonated. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I was like, I think I'm at the right place. And the whole 3-year program was about being found as a young boy. And because what I could do very well is hide myself between a mask of intellect and a bit almost like above people and looking at the world and seeing all things, but not really being embodied and be part of everyone and just be there, because that was way too scary, because there was so much unresolved pain and grief and unmet needs that I didn't want to go to. But I wasn't even aware of that. So he said that. I said, what does he mean? But somewhere it resonated. And then last year in the retreat, it came out, all of that. And I realized that this little boy that just wants to play and wants to be spontaneous, I could bring that more into my work, into my relationships. And I remember sitting on a cushion one day and realizing, like, hey, I feel more and more like that little boy. And then I remembered this voice of the teacher said about, what touches me is this little boy that wants to be found. Because it takes a lot of courage, but also good, I would say, good guidance. To that's why I did this program, to work through that, and to face the pain that needs to be faced. Because it also makes you more of a whole human being. I like what Jung said. He said, I'd rather have a whole human being than a good human being.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Feels like a fitting ending. To me, we've done over 2 hours.
It flies by quickly.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for sitting down
Thank
here.
Thank you for the invite. Really nice talking to you.
Yeah. Your book, Finding What Was Never Lost, is for sale. I think your website and online in various places. I will link all the website, social media, and other channels, stuff that you are. People can find you in the show notes. If there's anything else you'd like to share, I'd like to give you the space as we're closing off.
Well, I shared a lot, I think. I would say when people are interested in meditation, I think I keep repeating that it's not about achieving something. It is about training equanimity, being present with whatever is going on. And but I've already said that, so maybe that's a nice way to end. And once you think you're finished, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexander, and thanks everyone. Thanks everyone tuning in, for listening, watching. I'm humbled by this conversation, and I feel like there's so much more to explore to life. And I want to end with a question for you, like, what is there? See if you can find what is there when you stop doing. What is there when you just are? Thanks so much for tuning in. See you again next week.